Oh, shit. Back in this dream again.
Wake up. Babe, wake up please. Babe, wake up. The FNAF movie just dropped.
The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at times.
But wait, how did we get here? Well, my dear viewer, for that we must take a step back into the story of this one charming fellow that in his desperation created the single most successful indie horror franchise ever. This is the story of Five Nights at...
We know.
What?
We know the story.
What? For the love of God, you ruined the pacing of the video! Anyway, so a summary it is, I guess. So, in 2014, we have our fellow Scott Cawthon commencing development of the first installment of what eventually would become Five Nights at Freddy's on February. Scott had been having a rough journey up until that point, with many of his releases going unnoticed and essentially losing all hope in ever creating something popular until...
They're saying the game is too scary, huh? Time to make a scary game.
And so he does, and to his surprise, the game is an absolute success! And so Scott capitalizes and starts making the sequel for that game, which was in development for 4 months at best. And the results? A complete success! Launching Scott's name and popularity through the roof and making his games even more popular. And so, Scott, now with 2 games, thinks to himself on what to do next.
Oh, what should I do?
Of course, capitalize and make a sequel. And so he does, making a sequel to the sequel, which is also a success, although to a lesser degree, and making another sequel to the sequel, which then gets a sequel done to the sequel of the sequel of the sequel of the original game. And it's in this last sequel where most players say that stuff went wild, where the original franchise lost its footing and became something completely different. Now, you need to know, and already probably do know, that the Five Nights at Freddy's games don't necessarily have the most thrilling gameplay. However, what the games lack in gameplay, they make up in story. And it's in this aspect where Sister Location falls short by some of the community's standards, breaking the timeline of the story more than it already was. Introducing futuristic robots that far outperform the original band and far outcompetes the original maps of the original games. And take a mental note, this game takes place before Five Nights at Freddy's 1 and 2. It essentially broke every conception of what fans knew as advanced animatronic tech, and this is not touching on what happened with Ennard and Afton's family.
Was that the scope of Freddy 7?
This is not to say that Sister Location is not a good game, it definitely was. but it is to say that it broke expectations, both the good and bad, and it created immense plot holes that the community had to come up with creative ways to solve, wink wink, and patch them up. Anyway, then we have the sequel to that game, Pizzeria Simulator, supposedly a game to finish off the Finest of Earth franchise for good, even though it was supposedly finished like 3 games ago. And of course, it is a success, trying to salvage the story and introducing both new and old gameplay back to the franchise. But here we have an issue, and that is that this franchise has a problem with letting go and finishing. Specifically, it refuses to let go of the original villain, the purple guy, or by the name he got from the books, William Afton. And whilst I understand that without him, the games would have no general central plot or central figure that connects everything, we have been shown that other medias of Finest of Earth's content prove that his figure is not necessary to have an intriguing plot, and he doesn't need to be the main plot point always. Then again, I believe Pizzeria Simulator tried to end everything off and it did a pretty good job at it. It also has such a banger of an ending that to me it mended the problems the franchise had up until that point.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth. If you still even remember that name.
No. Scott at this point decided to give another company the rights to produce Finest of Earth's games. This company being Stillwell Studios, which would go over to create the remaining Finest of Earth's games, which we're not gonna go over because they have their own problems and dramas with them. Alright, now that we got through the summary... Oh. So, the movie's reception was mixed to say the least. Summarizing the opinions of people is hard, but the audience tends to agree that the movie was... good? Critics themselves hated the movie, but that is expected. Why, you ask? Because the movie itself is less a movie and more like a glorified montage of fan service and references. Now, it's not to say that the movie is completely bad, but the plot itself is bad. It heavily relies on fans that already knew the franchise to watch it, so it doesn't become repetitive, boring, and overall uninteresting to the viewer. You can only make a person watch the same scene 6 times and not expect him losing interest in the plot or just getting bored out. There's also the fact that there's absolutely no jump scares in this movie other than Balloon Boy and maybe some other that I forgot, which in the context of the franchise kinda defeats the purpose. And that's another theme going for this movie. It cannot decide whether it takes itself seriously in a horror kind of way or if it prefers the goofy comedic scenes. It lingers in that uncomfortable middle line that brings down the quality of the story as a result. And the story. The story is something I will try not to dwell on because if the original timeline had plot holes, trying to piece together the lore of these alternate stories like trying to take a peek into the void. In any case, there's certainly a bunch of stuff to be developed further should we get a sequel to this movie, and I'm confident that they can pull it off if they try hard enough. All in all, the movie, unless you were a fan of the series, was a disaster. Yet, it made more than 10 times the budget the movie actually had.
Open it.
And that's something Blumhouse likes to do. It likes to cut down the budget to maximize profits, in the process killing off a lot of potential that the movie could have, all in the name of the sweet. The movie was a financial hit, that's undeniable, and we're sure to get a sequel out of that, so we'll have to wait and see what happens to this franchise. We'll also be getting Help Wanted 2 from Steelwool real soon, but until then, Five Nights at Freddy's will go back to sleep, awaiting the moment to strike back. Like and subscribe!